Second Vatican Council, and we're doing an introduction tonight. The key question that emerged 40 years after the Council was how we interpret it. And there are schools of thought in the Church about how we should interpret it. Differing schools of thought and some conflicting. So it's become, in fact, a rather key topic in the Church at the moment, just how we deal with Vatican II. But one person who didn't go, Joan, how do I get it to go? Left? Right? There we go. One person who gave us an interpretation of it is Pope John Paul II himself. He said the documents of the Council have lost nothing of their brilliance and their value. He wrote this after the Jubilee, and he said he considers the Council the great grace bestowed on the Church in the 20th century, so a grace of God in the 20th century, and a sure compass for the future. A grace of last century, a compass for us in this century. Now that's a beautiful description of Vatican II. Pope Benedict said himself that 40 years, that the positive is far greater and livelier than it appeared in the turbulent years of 1968. 1968 was the year of the student revolution in Paris. It's when he was teaching in Tübingen and students stormed the university, when left-wing terrorism, student terrorism in Europe and so on. Very turbulent years, and turbulent in the Church. In the Church. And 1968, if you read his autobiography and biographies, was a very pivotal year for him in his own life. So he says, the positive is far greater and livelier than it appeared in 1968. In other words, it looked to have negative consequences in 1968 because there was so much chaos and turbulence. And today we see that the good seed of the Council develops slowly, it's growing, and we have great gratitude for us. So in other words, in 1968 he was rather concerned about the consequences of the Council. The achievements of the Council, according to the late Cardinal Avery Dulles, an American Jesuit cardinal, enormously respected. He says, he listed 10 achievements that no matter where you stand, you've got to say, this is what the Council achieved. Aggiornamento is an Italian word for updating, bringing the Church up to date in the way it does things and it appears and functions. The reformability of the Church, the recognition that the Church can reform, which those of you who are older, when I was a child, we were taught that the great thing about the Catholic Church is that nothing changes. But at the Council we learned that the Church is reformable and indeed needs to reform. A renewed attention to the Word of God, the Scriptures. Anyone who lived through the Council, lived before it or after, knows that when I came home from my first year in the seminary and said to a relative of mine who'd gone to a very fine Catholic girls' school in Brisbane, that I was really wrapped in the study of the Bible that I was doing, and she said, the Bible? I thought that was a Protestant book. But that's changed, surely. Collegiality, the College of Bishops, the fact that the bishops work together as a body of bishops, and we'll see a lot more about that next week. Religious freedom. There was a great debate in the Council about whether or not we thought religious freedom was a value that people were entitled to, a right, even if they were wrong. So was Spain, a Catholic country, obliged to give freedom to people who were not Catholics and therefore in error? Before the Council they said no, they shouldn't, because that's promoting a false truth. At the Council they said no, religious freedom, no matter what, is a right. It's a big development, and it's owed largely to an American Jesuit, John Courtney Murray, who influenced the American bishops. The active role of the laity is one of the great fruits of the Council. Regional and local variety, we recognise that being different is a good thing if it's a gift, not a conflictual reality. Ecumenism, new after the Council. Not new in itself, but new for us. dialogue with other religions. We didn't do that before the council. Some did, but very few. The social mission of the church, the great social teaching of the church, and its mission of world transformation really gained strength after the council. So their achievements that the great Cardinal Avery Dulles, highly respected, listed as 10 great achievements of the council. He only died a month or two ago. In the 1950s, those of you who were around, they were the marks of Catholic identity. What made you a Catholic? Friday abstinence stood out. It's often said we ate fish on Friday. Well, you didn't have to, you just didn't eat meat. Latin liturgy, always the same all over the world. We were very proud of that. Devotion to Mary and the saints, that singled us out from most other Christians, particularly Protestants. Devotion to the Pope was intense in the Catholic community. Now, they were markers. Anyone want to, I put some other red dots there, anyone want to add another marker that really marked Catholics out in the 1950s?
You did what Father told you.
Sorry?
You did what Father told you.
Did what Father told you. Yes, it was a very, the clergy had enormous power in the 1950s. Any others? Catholic schools. Catholic schools were full of Catholics. And Catholics sent their kids to Catholic schools.
And Catholic schools were full of religious men and women.
Religious men and women, yes.
Not allowed to read the Bible?
Well, we mentioned that, but there was a kind of a resistance to the Word of God even, of white people reading it. Sorry?
Your sodalities, Holy Name.
Yes, all of those. A Catholic would want to be active, belong to something. The Holy Name Society, Children of Mary, YCW. You were in something. Okay, that's enough. But you can see, we had very clear markers. Okay, what's the larger context of the council? All the councils that went before. Now, I'm just going to put those up. I'm not going to go through them. Why have I grouped them? The first 3 councils, all Christians recognise. I mean, some newer Protestant groups perhaps don't know much about these kind of things, but all the ancient churches recognise those 3. But the Council of Ephesus and the next one, the Council of Chalcedon, there was a split. So Armenians, Egyptians, Ethiopians are split from the Greeks and the Russians. They don't share Eucharist, and it happened then, in the 5th century. The next cluster, we share those with the Orthodox. So the Greeks in town would share all those 7 councils with us. But after that, we don't share the councils. Only the West has those councils. And the first, up until the 12th, were really councils of reform within the Western Church, constantly trying to reform bishops, priests, religious orders, parishes. The next ones tended to be aimed at trying to bring unity to the church. Right up to the Council of Trent after the Reformation, that was the Catholic reform. Our attempt to deal with the Reformation and to continue the reform in ourselves, because the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, was part of an enormous movement of reform going on for centuries within the church. Then the First Vatican Council, which emphasised the role of the Pope, and then we come to the Second Vatican Council, of course. The larger context, what's another larger context? The Protestant Reformation and the Catholic reform that was followed it, or was at the same time as it, the Council of Trent, the Jesuits, St. Ignatius of Loyola, the reform of the Carmelites, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Charles Borromeo in Milan, who was the model bishop for implementing the Council of Trent. There was a great reform movement in the church. Larger context, the First Vatican Council, Pastor Aeternus, one of its decrees, taught papal primacy. We'll look at that next week. And papal infallibility. Dei Filius, another decree of the First Vatican Council, talked about the relationship between faith and reason and carved it out in a particular way that was changed or developed